Yeah, City Council has been taxing and spending like there simply is no bottom to the purse. Anytime that taxpayers ask City Hall to hold the line on taxes, you'll quite often be told, well, the only way we can control taxes is by reducing police or fire services. Well, the following slides demonstrate some ways that they have spent your tax dollars in recent years that have absolutely nothing to do with the levels of service. We spent $120,000 on a single toilet down in Diana Krall Plaza. Makes my bathroom rental look like a real bargain. Then we put a $200,000 fancy schmancy wall on the end of a $300,000 building on Victoria Road. Can't make this up. Up at the train station, looks great after the renovation, restored to its former glory. But why was it necessary to give a $300,000 tax exemption to the pub operators that are operating inside the train station? Basically, that just gives them an unfair advantage over any other pub operators that are in the area. Now my favorite. This is the saga that leads into the $16 million shiny new staff office that was built at the end of Mayor Rattan's last term in office. We deemed that the old annex was unsafe until we decided we had to move the mayor and the legislative services in there while we were renovating City Hall, and then it turns out it wasn't really that unsafe after all. What would it have cost to bring that building up to an acceptable seismic standard is an unknown quantity, because there never was a tender called for that would have come up with a hard number. There was just a guess, as it might cost a whole lot of money or maybe wouldn't cost too much money, but nobody ever really knew. And then finally, after the shiny new office was built, this building was devalued by putting a covenant on, or an agreement on it, terms of sale, that means that instead of being worth $3 million that it was assessed for, it wound up being sold for only $1. All the time that city staff and city council were deciding what they were going to do in the way of a shiny new office, this building, Dunsmuir Place, was on the market, and it recently sold for about $5.5 million. It is 40% bigger than the new staff office that we did build. Now remember, 40% more office, $5.5 million. 40% less office, $16 million. Now actually that $16 million would include the cost of furnishings and stuff like that as well. The actual building cost was at least $13 million. I suspect it's more than that, if you can ever find out exactly all of the charges that were against the construction of this building. So we could have had a building 40% bigger for $5.5 million. Instead we chose a building 40% smaller, and we've got $16 million tax dollars in it. Are you still convinced that we have to reduce our fire and police services in order to have saved some money in this city? Now, this is a good piece of property. It is waterfront. Everybody knows they don't make any more waterfront. However, why over the years have private developers shied away from this property if it's such a great deal? What do private developers know that the development group at City Hall don't? The WELLCOX RAILYARDS has probably cost us about $5 million so far. One of the big problems with this piece of property is 80% of the total area is controlled by C-SPAN and Island Corridor Foundation, both of whom have what's known as rights of use licenses that are perpetual. In other words, they last forever. Island Corridor Foundation pays no rent and pays no taxes. C-SPAN pays no rent but does pay $30,000 a year in taxes. But they do control 80% of the total mass and nearly all of the usable waterfront. And we are also looking at completely unknown costs to remediate this industrial site to ever make it useful for anything other than a heavy industrial site. This is a map that just shows you roughly the whole area up by the Gabriola Ferry Terminal. Right immediately adjacent to that is the C-SPAN yard, where you see all the tractor trailers loading and unloading off barges all the time. That's also where the Island Rail barge comes in that moves product via rail on the island. That little wee area called the Island PALLET is basically the only piece of this property that we actually can access off of Front Street and make any use of. That's the piece of property that is currently under a demolition project. Now the real question comes down, you see the two big red lines at the bottom of the picture. The one comes in off Esplanade. That is where the trestle is that leads down to the Assembly Wharf, the cruise ship terminal, and the Port Authority's property. And the roadway leads just down to the Port Authority's property. So why in the world the deal makers at City Hall found it necessary for the city taxpayer to take on this $7 million trestle liability and the maintenance and service of the road, when in fact it really only services the Port Authority. Clearly the Port Authority is the one that benefits from this deal, and they should be the one that's picking up the tab. This is a familiar shot. This is from Esplanade. That is leading to the bridge of the trestle that we're just talking about. That's the entrance to the Assembly Wharf area, Western Forest Products, and the cruise ship terminal area. This is that same trestle from underneath, and that's the trestle that's going to have to be repaired and replaced at a cost estimated so far to be $7 million. Again, that's the trestle that really only services the Port Authority's land. Not a very good picture, but it's taken from the trestle, and you see all those pallets stacked up. Well, that's basically the area that's going to be cleared off. Soil is going to be removed, and then the building that's there is going to be demolished as well. That's the area that's probably earmarked for being a downtown bus terminal, even though the committee that developed some plans for this site are warning to not go ahead and proceed with little bits and pieces on an ad hoc basis of this site until you really know how you're going to develop it out. I wouldn't be surprised if this winds up being the new bus terminal for downtown Nanaimo, and then we figure out what to do with the rest of the land later. Just a general shot to give you an idea that basically just about everything you see in that picture is owned by the city, but it is controlled by either C-SPAN or Island Corridor Foundation. This is a familiar picture from Front Street. That's the area that usually, quite often, that yard will be full of tractor trailers that have come off the C-SPAN barge moving product onto Vancouver Island. Now down to 100 Gordon Street, that's behind the Vancouver Island Conference Center. This is the spot that was supposed to have had a hotel built on it originally when the Vancouver Island Conference Center was built. In fact, we paid a project manager a $3 million fee, and part of that fee was to see that this hotel was actually built. We never did get the hotel, and it still cost us $3 million. We tried to sue for the $3 million, but we lost another $50,000 in legal fees and never did see our $3 million coming back. I have made a standing offer with the city that anytime they don't want another hotel built on this site, I will not see that one's not built for only $500,000. That's a joke. In order to get this hotel built that's supposed to give all this extra stock of rooms to our conference center so that finally we will make a success of the convention business, we have offered up basically a $10 million tax exemption to the people to build this hotel. Well, that might be justifiable if it did add to the stock of rooms that were going to be available for conventions, if that meant we were actually going to start to attract all these larger conventions we claim to be missing out on. But the business model put forward by the business owner that's going to build this hotel basically says that it's going to be used to service about 70 or 73,000 Asian tourists that come through their tourist business in Asia. So if that's the kind of business that they're bringing from Asia into this hotel, it's going to leave precious little stock left over to make any kind of a difference to our convention business at all. So basically this $10,000 tax exemption is being given up, and the builder of the hotel really is not doing what the intent of that even was. Just another picture of the same site. All this there is a fence and some pretty pictures. There was supposed to have been a hole in the ground in March, then it was May, now we're into October. I suspect there might be a little bit of activity going on this site before the upcoming election, so it looks like something is actually progressing. Remember, that hotel tax exemption of $10 million was to help try and make a success out of our failing convention business. But the business model that's being put forward by the builder of the hotel is going to do nothing to add to the amount of rooms that are available to build the convention business. That hotel, by the way, is not providing any of its own parking and has made an arrangement with the city to use about 100 parking spaces underneath the existing convention center. Basically, that's also going to mean that there's going to be 100 fewer parking spaces in downtown Nanaimo for other uses. This picture is maybe not really clear what it is, but that's the site of the Hilton Hotel, proposed Hilton Hotel. On the left-hand side there, you see the covering over the war canoe over at Georgia Park. Well, recently, with the stroke of a pen, the owner of this property had the value of his property increased by multiple millions of dollars because it went from allowing 25 floors up to 32 floors and increased the density on the site. And for that increased benefit, the Nanaimo City taxpayer, I don't really see where we've seen any benefit from that at all. And that's just not the right way to be doing business if you're looking out of the best interest of the Nanaimo taxpayer. One that I'm sure everybody is familiar with was the ongoing Colliery Dam debacle, where it seems that we spent about $2.5 million addressing what basically is a non-existent problem. The latest $1.5 million study has revealed that now, instead of 150 million lives being lost, there probably wouldn't be any lives lost at all. And instead of this great wall of water rushing down through Harewood, that wouldn't happen either. But in the unlikely event that a flood that might occur once every 35,000 or 50,000 years might flow over the top of the dam, and then that might wash away the tons and tons and tons and tons of fill that is banked up against the dam, and then that might cause a 4-foot thick steel reinforced pinned into bedrock dam to somehow fail, would result in about $2 million worth of property damage and 0 loss of life. And believe it or not, to mitigate against that $2 million property loss, the recommendation seems to be coming forth to spend about $8 or $9 million to repair the dam. Who would spend $9 million to mitigate against a $2 million problem that might happen once in 34,000 years? You can't make this stuff up. And now we move on to the conference center, which has got about 70 million tax dollars sitting in it, and which so far this year is producing woefully nearly no delegate days. It's not fulfilling its purpose at all. Its existence is the reason that we're giving away a $10 million tax break to one hotel at 100 Gordon Street, and probably a much larger tax break to the Hilton Hotel if that deal ever comes together. But this building itself is probably costing Nanaimo taxpayers about $5 million a year. In other words, if we didn't have it, we would be saving about $5 million a year. That $5 million is made up of the cost for the management fee. There's a company gets paid at least $1 million a year to run the place. We have to service the debt on the building because we had to borrow over $20 million to build it. The building has got ongoing maintenance issues, of course, like any building. Its heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, all those things are aging and are going to need replacing and upgrades sooner or later. In any case, that building is costing the Nanaimo taxpayers about $5 million a year, give or take. If we could recover anything close to the $70 million that we've got tied up in it, we could completely eliminate the outstanding debt, and we could put maybe $30, $40 million cash back into the bank. And that could offset any of our foreseeable tax increases for many years to come. It's something that really needs to be considered, because if we repurpose this building, sell it to the private sector, let them figure out what to do with it, it takes at least a $5 million burden off the back of the taxpayer, and it could put a substantial amount of cash back into the bank account. This council has been spending like they have a no-limit credit card in their pocket, and the bills just keep racking up because they know that it's the Nanaimo taxpayer that's going to be able to pay for it. Whether we can afford it or not, it goes onto our credit card. The average Nanaimo taxpayer in this city, I think, has had just about as much of tax increases as they're willing to swallow. The city's own Ipsos Reid study indicated that about 50% of the people that were surveyed said, enough is enough. I will even take a reduction in my services if it means you can roll back my taxes. And yet that seems to be a message that this council just has not been able to hear, because they have been spending, spending, spending. And these are examples of ways that they didn't have to spend your tax dollars in any way that would have affected your services at all. In other words, they did not have to impinge on your services whatsoever to control your taxes. All they had to do was control how some of this spending has been done. Think about it and ask your candidates in this election what they've been doing this past 3 years.